So we've known each other for 9 years. I actually checked this up. I looked this up. Now here you are at Princeton. And I'm going to read your bio and that they did for you. Dr. Keri L. Day, theology. Keri Day is an associate professor of constructive theology and African American religion at Princeton Theological Seminary. If I were to say I'm a professor of theology, people kind of understand. But when you say associate professor of constructive theology, how would you explain what that is?
So for me, constructive theology is sort of just this recognition that theological articulations are constructs. So constructive theology is trying to just complicate that message a bit about what theology understands itself to be and do by saying that actually when we think of theology, we are already talking about human activity in the world and how they're trying to make meaning about God, themselves, and others.
When you're complicating, you drew me to systematic theology. So biblical scholars, we don't like systematic theology because the term doesn't reflect the complexities and the paradox of theology as presented in the Bible. There's all these angles, tensions, and when you say systematizing, you're almost like taking it away from its biblical source. So it feels like you're almost contesting the term systematic theology, or am I reading too much into that?
No, I think that some constructive theologians actually would contest the systematic enterprise. I think that you're absolutely right. But I think it's more complicated than that. It's either systematic theology or constructive theology. It's sort of this polarizing debate between orthodoxy and liberalism. And people are trying to think about the spectrum, right, of how people think about, in this case, the project of theology. I mean, I think there's a way in which even systematic theologians are doing constructive work because they're trying to get away from this idea that we can rationally render internally coherent to the letter, the doctrines of the Christian faith, that they want to make room for ambiguity and complexity and profound difference.
So let's talk about Princeton a little bit. You came from a Pentecostal background, you went to Vanderbilt, then you went to Bright, and then you're at Princeton. You're at a Presbyterian seminary, but coming as a Pentecostal, doing work in Pentecostal historical theology. So what's it like for you to enter the space unapologetically Pentecostal into this like big Presbyterian historical tradition?
I think what is challenging, maybe I could say, is as a Black Pentecostal, of course, what sits at the forefront of my understanding of Christian witness is race, not as something that is like a consequence of being a Christian or something that's secondary, but something that's at the heart of what it means for me to think about my own Christian identity. My own Christian identity is lived in and through my embodiment, so that what it means to show up as Christ in the world concretely, and therefore a part of salvation, has everything to do with whether we are seeking justice, for example, right? And so I find that although the rhetoric is there, and this is just not about like Princeton, I think in a lot of white liberal institutions, the rhetoric is there. Right. Institutional action and how these institutions think about the formation of community is very different, right? And so it's sort of attempting to speak prophetically and to bear witness to what I'm saying to this larger institution that I have found to be challenging.
Your title of your next book is Redeeming Azusa. You also talk about theological and democratic imagination. So imagination is not a word frequently associated with theology or even any study of the Bible. So you go to Sunday school, you don't think about imagination, you think about doctrine and learning the right things. So it feels like even the usage of the word imagination in the past can be provocative, it can be challenging, subversive maybe.
The title that I've been thinking about right now is Azusa Reimagined, constructing the Pentecostal imagination, which still includes these ideas of what you're saying. So I want to hold on to what you just said. Maybe it's not in the title, but to hold on to what you just said, because that's at the heart of the project.
Well, tell me about that change. Why did you
absolutely. Because what I realize is that primarily this project about the Azusa Street revival is primarily a constructive project, right? It's just not a reclamation of it as such. It ultimately is oriented towards reconstructing and offering a different interpretation on the meanings of the Azusa revival for today, right? And therefore, constructing the Pentecostal imagination is about offering a different way of thinking about Pentecostalism today. So it is thinking about this, the historical research that I'm doing on what how I'm interpreting what Azusa was doing and being, but also given that, how does it expand our theological and democratic imagination?
Why is it important for a non-Pentecostal Christian to think about?
I think the primary reason is institutional for shifts that are happening in theological education right now. So while we know that in theological education, we're experiencing sort of a decline in those from mainline denominations coming in and applying and enrolling into seminaries and divinity schools, what we're also seeing alongside that, it's a sharp increase in minoritized or people of color that are coming into seminary and divinity schools. Historians are right now saying that we are living through what will be considered the next great reformation, and it's happening in the global South. But that's going to have a huge bearing, especially into our future, on how we understand Christian faith, what we take Christian faith to be, right? And therefore Christian practice. And for me, those are two extremely compelling reasons, because these two reasons sit at the heart of Christianity today and why people who are non-Pentecostal should really care.
Right, thank you. If I ask your students, what kind of professor is Dr. Day?
I think my students would describe me as pastoral. I think they would. I've had some students actually say that they think I'm, brilliant. I don't think that's a bad thing to claim, particularly in a world where Black women are being told left and right that they do not have the capacity to participate in intellectual production. Finally, I think that they would just say, I'm deeply committed to the holistic development and health of my students. That's something that I'm deeply committed to. So
I think your students are right.
Thank you, Roger.
An accurate precision of Dr. Day.
Oh, thank you, Roger.